Good morning and welcome to Planted in the Word, week 24. We're almost halfway. That's really great that you're hanging in there. This week, we're going to deal a lot with reading about Solomon and his execution of the plans that David gave to him for the first temple. Now, David collected the silver and the gold and the bronze, and he had the plans drawn up. And it says that he basically handed them to Solomon for Solomon to execute. And now we get to see all the details as we read these next few passages about all the minute things that David had planned for. And it really is fun to read. And it is unbelievably overwhelming if you stop to consider the millions and millions and millions of dollars in gold and silver that were used in this building of this temple. And in addition to that, some of the massive amount of just humanity that was required in order to hew the rocks and haul them onto the site. In fact, one of the things I wanted to focus in on was in chapter 3. There is a verse about them beginning to lay the foundation stones of the temple, and they're massive. In fact, it reads, chapter 3, verse 3. Now these are the foundations which Solomon laid for building the house of God. The length in cubits, according to the old standard, was 60 cubits, and the width was 20 cubits. Now, to give you some perspective on that, a cubit they think is roughly about 18 inches. So that means that these stones were approximately 90 feet long and 30 feet wide. Now, I did have the opportunity to go to Israel a few years ago, and we did get to go down beside and underneath the Temple Mount to see some of these foundation stones. So I'm going to put a picture of one of them on the screen. The problem is it's so large and I'm so close to it that you can't even get the whole thing in a picture. But if you can imagine where the people are standing off to the left is one of the seams, and I can't even get the right seam in the photo. It is actually a stone that is so large, it is longer than a school bus. So if you try to wrap your brain around how they had the technology to get those stones into place, it is just really amazing. It is really an ancient wonder of that whole Temple Mount system and how it was put together. But one of the areas I want to focus in on today and talk about is something that I brought up in week 7, and we were talking about Leviticus 9 and the actual ending and dedication of the tabernacle. And if you remember, it might be good to go back and watch it real quick if you don't remember, but one of the things we talked about is Aaron laying out the sacrifices and everything was done and the temple was consecrated, and in order for God to put his name on it, fire came down from heaven and completely consumed the sacrifice. And we talked about God, like last week, often using fire as a picture of himself and sort of that stamp of approval that yes, he was entering into a covenant relationship with his people. Well, I challenged you to find another place in Scripture where that happens again. And we're actually going to read that this week. Solomon, once the whole temple is finished and completed, in chapter 6, he gets up and he dedicates it to the Lord and he blesses it. And the whole chapter 6 is really amazing. But the beauty is the repetition of God in reviewing and reinstituting his covenant with his people that happens in chapter 7, verse 1. And it's going to sound familiar, and let me read this to you. 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 1 says this. Now when Solomon had finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the house. This is the second time that the house of God has been dedicated, and the name of God comes down, and he whoosh in a fire completely consumes the sacrifice. And it says that the cloud filled the temple so much that the priests couldn't see and had to leave. So we see that God once again is confirming his covenant with his people. Solomon has dedicated his new house, his permanent location, the place where his name is. He has handed it over, and the presence of God comes and fills it, and once again does the same thing. It accepts the offering and the sacrifice that the Israelites have made. It reaffirms the covenant they have that Yahweh is going to be their God, and he puts his name and his stamp of approval on it. And I love the picture. First in the tabernacle, now in the temple. And I'm going to encourage you one more time. There's another place in Scripture that God does this again. We'll talk about it when we get there. I hope this encourages you to continue to look for the patterns that God uses over and over in Scripture as you read. Enjoy these next few passages. Have a great week. Bye-bye.